Marty, how does a basketball player become a filmmaker?
Very slowly. I actually didn't get into filmmaking until I finished my undergrad. My last semester of college, when I went to UConn, I had taken a creative writing class, and the professor had been a screenwriter. And I had thought about doing it. Yeah, I always thought it might be fun. I worked at Blockbuster Video when I was in college, and had a good time there, and never really thought of it as a possibility to make a living, but thought it might be fun to take, to kind of dip a toe into. So I wrote a screenplay my last semester of undergrad at UConn, and it was a basketball story, actually. It was a story about a college athlete who tries to throw the NCAA tournament. I can't forget the name. What was the name of it? I can't even think of the name of it, but it was really bad. But I wrote it, and I really enjoyed the process of it, even though I knew, there was a lot more to learn. So once I got out of undergrad, I kind of didn't play basketball quite as much. Started volunteering on indie film sets just to kind of learn the business a little bit. And then I got into film school at Florida State after about 3 years of that, and then got there and then sort of learned the ropes, and the whole story kind of started from there.
Was it inevitable that you would move to Los Angeles? Was this sort of something that you knew you were going to be doing?
I don't think it was. I got to the point where I knew that I wanted to make movies, but I wasn't sure if Los Angeles was going to be where I ended up. And it may still not be. My first time in LA was before I finished up film school at Florida State. This was in the summer of 2004. I came out here and I interned for a summer, and I worked for the producers of the American Pie movies, and had a great time there. At the time, it was a combination production company, management company. And so I got to learn both the production side and the rep side, which was really great. But when I graduated, I really was kind of iffy on it, because at that time, I think I was 27, and I was really still kind of a Northeastern kid, having grown up in Connecticut. The city was a lot for me. So at the same time, there was talk of a movie studio being built in Connecticut, where there was a film tax credit that had just been started like the year prior. And these guys were interested in building a movie studio, and they wanted to hire local people to work there. So I took a chance when I graduated, and I actually moved back home. And then I stayed there for about 10 years. So that was sort of the first detour out of LA that I had. But fast forward, after those 10 years, the film business had left Connecticut because the film tax credit disappeared, as happened in many states. So at that point, I started thinking, okay, do I want to come back? Do I want to go to LA? Do I want to try to work with the grown-ups, after working in independent film for a long time? So I started looking for work, and after about a year of it, I actually got an offer to work in the film school at Chapman University.
Oh, nice.
I had taught previously, but this was not a teaching position. This was a staff position in their film school as a production manager. So I thought of that as sort of the catalyst to get me out there, and then I'd kind of see where things went. So in 2015, that was when I moved out to LA, and that was when I really, decided to make a go of it and try it here.
What would your advice be for someone that wants to, dip their toe in the water here, or just come out here? Because I know it's hectic. It's hard to find an apartment. It's hard to find a parking space.
Yeah.
And so, what are some tips you can kind of give people to arm themselves when they come out here?
Well, I think information is power. The more you can set yourself up before you get here, I think the better off you are. When I came out here in 2015, I already had a job. That's a rare thing, I know, but even if you're in a situation where, if you work at Starbucks, you can transfer to any Starbucks in the United States after you're there for a certain amount of time. So if you can find a place, if you come out here on vacation for a week and you look at local places that you think might be interesting to live in, you can set yourself up to get a job, in that area. Obviously, not everyone works at Starbucks, but as the more you can sort of prepare your life so that when you get here, you're not completely floating in the wind, I think the more effective things can be. If you're looking on Craigslist, if you can find a room before you get out here, that saves you a lot of stress, obviously. Any friends that you have, any family that you have, really anywhere in Southern California, that's a benefit, because any network that you have here, is better than sort of free floating, when you're here. When I came here in 2004, I didn't know anyone. I literally just kind of landed in town, and I was bouncing from couch to couch of film students that I had known when I was living in Florida. So that was not the best way to do it in retrospect. But, it took a little time to kind of create that base. So the more that you can do to sort of set that up before you get here, I think the better off you are.
What do you get here in Los Angeles that you don't get anywhere else? Regarding filmmaking, I should say.
I think in Los Angeles, there's, I don't know what the right word is. I think in Los Angeles, there's a concentration of people that are completely and totally dedicated to filmmaking. And that's something I haven't found anywhere else in the country, anywhere else in the world, really. This is the town where you can go to any bar and you can find somebody talking about a new film that they're writing. And if you live in, the middle of Arkansas, that's harder to find. I think being here, there's an energy about filmmaking that really doesn't exist anywhere else. In my travels around the U.S., that I found that there are a couple cities that sort of have an energy all their own, sort of dedicated to one thing. Washington, D.C. is one of those cities, where everybody there has a passion for politics and a passion for public service. Here, that passion is for storytelling. It's for entertainment. And it really can be a motivating thing. If you're making a film anywhere else in the country, in a smaller town, it's harder to find that motivation, and it's harder to find those people that are totally dedicated to it along with you. So to be able to go to a coffee shop and to walk in and see somebody working on their script, that's something that can really kind of, buoy you if you're having a rough time doing something on your own. So I think in that sense, that's something that's really special about LA.
And that being said, too, I know it's hard to get comfortable here, but I feel like once people do get comfortable, it's hard to leave, because it is so hard to kind of like establish yourself. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on just kind of like keeping moving and not getting too stagnant in one place for your own growth?
Well, I think it depends on the person. Some people are very comfortable with setting up a life for themselves, and they're most effective when they know they have a base underneath them. But the producer of the movie that I'm working on now, he lives in Agora Hills, and he's been there his entire life. Oh. And he's very comfortable there. And you can tell that sort of consistency is something that he needs in order to keep functioning at a high level. But not everybody is like that. Like for me, I grew up, I lived in a bunch of different places growing up. I was homeless for a very short time. There's a lot of places that I've been, and that sort of kinetic sort of existence is something that works for me. That's something that gives me energy. So it really is, it helps me in my growth, because I enjoy being in new situations and being in new places, meeting new people, creating new networks, things like that. But it's not for everybody. So it really comes down to, who you are, knowing what kind of person you are, being honest with yourself about that. Because at one point I had actually tried, when I was working in one place and I was making a very good salary, I could feel myself kind of establishing roots in that place, but I knew that wasn't what I wanted to do. So you kind of, if you're in that situation and you really want to get to where you want to go, you have to risk ripping up roots sometimes and going somewhere else and trying something else, with the hope that can help you grow and help you get closer to where you want to be. So it's really kind of a person-by-person decision, I think.
What's fascinating about you, Marty, is you've bounced back and forth from different colleges and filmmaking and teaching. How many semesters of college would you say you've taught, all in all?
I've been a professor for about 14 semesters. Yeah, when I was at Quinnipiac University, I was there from 2005 to 2012. So yeah, I was a part of 12 semesters. I was part-time for 6 years, full-time for 1. I've worked another Yeah, I've worked another 5 years as staff in educational contexts. So I've been around for about between 15 and 17 years, I'd say. I've been involved in education.
Quinnipiac's a beautiful school, by the way. Yeah, it's a gorgeous place.
It really is.
What would you say is the difference, or maybe there's not a difference, between the questions some of these students have regarding filmmaking, whether it's just for a hobby or a career?
The questions are pretty consistent. Students, when they get involved in filmmaking, they have dreams of becoming the next Spielberg or the next, Night Shyamalan or whoever their favorite filmmaker is. But they don't know the steps that they need to take to get from wanting to be that to actually trying to be that. So I think a big part of film students now is just sort of helping them along the path of making things that are slightly bigger in scope and slightly better as they go along. Technically, those questions can run the gamut. There are some students who are wonderfully visually, but have trouble writing. Some students are great writers, but they don't understand pictures very well. I was actually like that when I started because I was a journalist before I got into filmmaking. It took a while for me to understand how to tell stories visually. So it's really, the technical questions are sort of not as important as it is helping them figure out how to get to where they want to be as a filmmaker. So like when I was at Chapman, for example, they had a really great process where when you're a sophomore, you make a 4 or 5 minute film. When you're a junior, you make a 7 to 8 minute film. When you're a senior, you make a 15-minute film. So that process sort of helps you expand the scope of what you're doing. And at every step, there's going to be a growing process because you're going to be dealing with things that you haven't dealt with before. So for the 3-minute film, if you've never made a film before, you might have questions about working with actors because you've never done that before. And then when you move into the 7 or 8 minute film, you might now have questions about working with union actors because you've never worked with SAG-AFTRA. And then when you get to the 15-minute film, well, I've never worked with a dog on set before, so how do I work with animals? So it's really just sort of helping the students understand what step in the process that they're at and helping them adjust to the new elements that they're working with at that stage. I think that's the biggest thing.
And speaking of new elements, you said off camera while we were setting up about how trends can take a while to seep into academia. Mm-hmm. And I found that fascinating, not knowing that world. Can you touch on that?
Yeah. So a lot of the work that I've done in academia focuses around crowdfunding and audience building. Especially in the last few years, I've done more kind of lecturing on that. I lectured at the University Film and Video Association conference last year in New Mexico on crowdfunding to an audience of film professors, which was actually really cool. It usually takes, when there's a new sort of element of filmmaking, whether it's sound and film or whether it's digital filmmaking, or in my case, crowdfunding and audience development, it takes about 10 years from the beginning of the use of that concept to the point where the higher education community embraces it and starts to teach it. So this was something, I didn't realize this at first, but about 10 years ago when I was teaching at Quinnipiac, I was really trying to get them to embrace crowdfunding and use it as part of the curriculum for their film students. But it was met with resistance because none of the professors that were there had actually done it before. So they didn't understand what it was, and they didn't understand how it could benefit students and how it can empower them to make their own content. So fast forward 10 years, Kickstarter now, generates more revenue per year than the National Endowment for the Humanities. Now people get it. They get it now. So higher education people are now looking at crowdfunding. There's papers being written about it now. It's part of professors' paths to tenure, is them sort of publishing on this. So now that it's kind of seeping into the world of academia, it's now more accepted and it's now being looked at as something that people want to teach because they understand it. So it takes a long time to get to that point. But now that it's here, I think film programs are starting to look at that, if not part of the curriculum, as something that they need to be introducing their students to. So like the schools I've worked at, it's very common for them to bring in folks from crowdfunding companies to do workshops. So that's a very common thing. All the big film schools are doing that now. So the next step would be, can you introduce that into the curriculum as a class that you need to take for a degree so that when you come out, everyone understands the basics of this and everyone can do it. So we're getting close to that point now, which I think is really exciting.
Why do you think it takes so long for a concept to seep into academia? Do you think because it needs to be vetted? Because someone can see it on Twitter and as a student and be like, oh, cool, and then they know about it. But why does it have to take so long to be vetted, sort of?
Well, I think generally, higher education is slow to change. And it's been like that for a long time. You know, anytime there's new technology, anytime there's new opinion on something, it takes a little while for it to sort of become common thought, I guess. Plus, a lot of the folks that work in higher education tend to be older, and crowdfunding is a technology that's primarily being used by younger folks. Not entirely, of course, but you know, primarily it's younger people that are realizing that know the tools and that are able to use them a little more efficiently than folks that are new to them. So I think those are two of the main reasons. And it's not just crowdfunding, really. Anything that sort of comes up as a new alternative to things that folks have been teaching, I think will naturally be met with skepticism. So in terms of funding, the way Hollywood's been run for a long time is you write a script, you find financing for it, and then you shoot it. So the process of being able to say, okay, well, I'm not going to wait for that. I'm going to go raise the money myself, and I'm going to use these tools on social media to do it on my own. That's a pretty big shift. And a lot of the professors that work at, so you know, the major film schools, they're used to this older model. And some of them have trouble wrapping their head around it, with good reason, because their entire career was based on, you know, on a prior model. So I think that skepticism, and I think that learning curve is part of what takes it that long for it to sort of become, you know, a baseline for higher ed.
Yeah, now they're talking about blockchain, you know, like, and I'm having trouble. Crowdfunding, I can wrap my head around because I was part of a campaign, but blockchain, whoo, and then I'm like really feeling dated with that because I'm having to, like, I don't get it. I've got to figure out, you know, so I can see why I don't feel like that removed from some of these generations, but then when I see something brand new that seems so foreign to me, I could see how people would be afraid of it.
Yeah, and I think if you're an effective educator, I think part of the process of getting to that acceptance is realizing that there's going to be things that come up that you don't know because there's other smart people in the world. And the hope is that if you're confident enough in your own abilities as an educator to say, okay, I don't get this, you have an opportunity to find people that are on the cutting edge of that stuff and bring them in to show you. I think the really great educators are the ones that realize that they don't know everything, which is really kind of a strange way to look at it. But like blockchain being a great example, if you were to bring in someone, you know, who worked for Coinbase or something like that, you know, like a crypto trading currency site or something, they could explain to your students, and by extension you, what blockchain is, how it can be applied to independent filmmaking, how it can be applied to financing, all these different things. I barely know anything about blockchain. I own a little bit of cryptocurrency. That's the only reason I even know what you're talking about. But I could see that as an opportunity to bring someone in and kind of talk about, you know, what it is and how it can help you. Because I've been through that with crowdfunding, I understand that there's things I don't know. So the hope is, you know, if you're a student, or if I'm a student, you know, I hope I'm working with folks who know what they are talking about, but who also know that they don't know everything. I think that's the best educational experience that you can get, is if you have folks that are like that.
After having written your own script, having been a college professor, you decided to go back to school for screenwriting, is it? What made you want to take that leap? What made you think that you didn't know enough about the topic?
Well, so when I decided to go back to Cal State Northridge for a second master's degree, I was met with a lot of skepticism from my friends and my family and basically everyone I know. For a long time, I wanted to be a professional screenwriter. That was the entry that I had into the business. I started writing first, and that led me to getting involved in production. I wanted to try to make it as a professional screenwriter before making it as a filmmaker. But when I went to Florida State, I quickly found out that I was good at producing. And as people know in the business, if you're good at something, you immediately start getting work at it and you get pigeonholed in that very quickly. So that sort of turned me into a producer, and it was hard to break out of that. I worked for about 10 years as a location manager, a production manager, a producer, and it was great. I met wonderful people, worked on wonderful films, but that really wasn't what I wanted to do. So that was part of what led me to try to make Rising Star, the first feature that I made, because I wrote the script and I wanted to have it produced. So the easiest way to do that is just to make it on your own. I say easy. The overriding thing was, I know I'm not getting any younger. At the time I was 39, and I thought, if I'm gonna do this, and if I'm really gonna dedicate myself to trying to be a writer, it needs to happen now. So after 2 years of working at Chapman University, I decided, okay, I'm gonna go back to school full time. I'm gonna get through this. I'm gonna spend 2 years and concentrate on writing and really bettering myself as a writer. It was really out of a desire to really focus on that for a little while and then just see what happens. If nothing happened after that time, I could go back to working and know that at least I tried. So I got into Cal State Northridge, and they were kind enough to offer me a job on the staff of their film school as well. So that was great. I worked as a student resource supervisor there for 2 years.
Oh, very
I
cool.
ran their script library, which was totally on brand.
Oh, wow.
And it was 2 wonderful years. And I wrote a TV spec for the show Black Mirror that placed in the Austin Film Fest screenwriting competition. I wrote 3 features, one of which I'm directing right now. It really was the right move. It was an unusual move, but it did a couple things. Like it gave me time to focus on writing, which was something that I really wanted to do. It gave me a chance to kind of reset my life a little bit, because I was really getting into the producing track again when I moved out here, because again, when you're good at something and people keep you on that track, whether it's in the business or academia, that's very true. And it really gave me time to kind of tell the stories that I wanted to tell, but that I didn't have time to. The thesis script that I wrote, which I'm hoping to direct one day, is a story about the death of my father. And I had been toying with it for probably 6-7 years, but I never had the time and the energy to sit down and actually write it. And now I do, and now I can hold it. So it needs work, but it exists. And that's a benefit of going to school that I think is really important to me. So yeah, that's why.
What was it like being a student on the first day?
It was interesting. The grad program that I was in, we had about, I think, 12 students in our class at the beginning of the program. And I actually wasn't the oldest one. There were 4 students that were older than me. 3 of them ended up dropping out.
Really?
Over the course of the program. And it was because they had family responsibilities, they had job responsibilities, and that sort of overtook their desire to get through the program. So once we graduated, I think I was the 2nd oldest in the class. So that really wasn't too much of a transition. Like, it didn't feel to me like I was in an undergraduate classroom. That would have been a pretty severe thing if I was the oldest person in the class by 20 years. But where there was a big transition was where I was working on staff. My job was, I was the manager of the script library at the film school, and I had a group of interns that worked for me every semester. So I would have, over the course of a semester, anywhere from 8 to 15 undergrads that I'd be interfacing with every single day. And that was really a big challenge, because I realized very quickly that I was out of touch with what young people were talking about and what they cared about and issues that they talked a lot about. CSUN is definitely a very activist campus.
Yes.
So that was something I was looking forward to being a part of, but I didn't realize just how fervent it was. And being involved with the students every day and talking with them about the news and things like that, it really brought home to me, what issues kids care about. And I think that'll help me, as I go on, as a teacher, and, also just being able to kind of understand what kind of stories people are looking for in the film marketplace as well. So that was a big transition, but I think it was a really good one.
Yeah, Generation X wasn't really much of a sort of an activist generation. I know our parents were.
Right.
But
right.
yeah, and maybe we're more so now as older adults than before. But yeah, that's something that I was very surprised at too, to see how much younger people, whether they're 35 or whatever, that care about it. They're very issue-based, cause-based, and I was very surprised at that.
Yeah, and the neat thing too about Cal State Northridge is how diverse the student population is. Obviously I'm a middle-aged straight white guy. I'm not exactly what they're looking for, but being able to work with students from all over the world, it really was great. Like the Latino population at CSUN it's almost a majority.
Oh wow.
Yeah, they're a Latino serving institution as well as a Pacific Islander serving institution. So they focus on working to help those students from those backgrounds. So every semester I had students from Mexico, from Spain, Portugal, Puerto Rico, like from all over the Spanish world, and we would work together, and we'd talk about like what movies did we enjoy and why did you like that. And when Black Panther came out, that was a great example. Every student of color that I worked with saw it that first weekend, and it was a transformative experience for them. Because they had never seen that on screen before. And that didn't hit home for me until I heard them talking about it. Being frank, I saw it the first weekend and I really enjoyed it, but I never thought of it as a cultural touchstone until I heard other students of color talking about how unbelievable it was that they finally saw themselves on screen as a superhero. So that was a great opportunity, being in that environment. Some other schools are, a little more whitewashed, I guess would probably be the best term.
Sure.
That's a great thing to have been part of, to have witnessed. So that really, that helped me, in my growth, as a human being, seeing that.
Were you hearing them on campus? Not just to you with the interns, but were you hearing them conversations?
Oh yeah, absolutely. When Black Panther came out, there was that with the African American community. When Captain Marvel came out, all the female students that I worked with were talking about that. And you think of these superhero films as not really cultural touchstones, right? But these students are really taking it seriously because that's the content that they consume the most. And when they see these things happening, it's a big deal. It really is a big deal. So, so a lot of people sort of brush films like that off. But when you look at how that audience is consuming it, it's a powerful thing.
What were your writing flaws when you were accepted to the CSUN program? What did you want to work on? Or was it more to just experience something else?
Oh, they're very specific things. The one thing when I finished Rising Star, when I look back at the script, the structure of that film could have been so much stronger, but I didn't know how to get it there. And I knew it when I watched the film. You could see it that something was missing, and it wasn't in the way that it was directed, it was not the way that it was edited or music or anything like that. Technically it was fine because I had great people working with me, but the story really wasn't enough to keep people's interest for 90 minutes. So part of me going into CSUN was a real desire to study structure and to study dramatics, the basics of dramatics. That was something that I never really had. When I went to Florida State, there were writing classes, but it really was more short film based and kind of formula based, I guess is the best way to put it. Like somebody has a goal, they have an obstacle, and they try to fix it all in 5 minutes. So I understood that, but how do you transpose that into a 90-minute film where you have to keep somebody's interest and there has to be a growth of a character and things like that? I didn't really understand that. So, and this is having taught a screenwriting class before. When I got to this point, I still realized, okay, I was able to teach this to some undergrads to the point where they could understand it in a short film format, but I didn't get it from the feature length format at that point. So when I got there, part of the reason why I applied there was Professor Edson, Eric Edson. He has a book on structure. So that's specifically like, that's his bailiwick. That's what he makes his money on. So I really wanted to work with him so that I could really get like a crash course on that. And it really helped. It really, really helped. And the best part was that wasn't the only paradigm that I was able to be exposed to in the program. A number of the professors that I had went to USC for screenwriting, and they have a different way that they teach screenwriting. It's the 8-sequence method. I had never heard of that before. So after learning with Eric for a little while, then I started working with these other professors who were talking about the 8-sequence method, and that made even more sense to me because Professor Edson is really, his structure analysis is really granular. It's down to the moment. 8-sequence is a little looser. It's not as exacting where things have to happen by a certain point. So the combination of learning both of those styles really helped me sort of figure out, okay, the stories that I want to tell can fit into both of these paradigms, just not completely one or the other. So now I'm at a point where when I have an idea for a story, I can sort of see where it fits. Is it more according to how Eric teaches it, or is it more according to 8-sequence? So it really is nice now where I can understand, there's a certain kind of story fits a certain kind of structure. And I didn't get that before. So that going through school really helped me, sort of learn to identify that.
That's interesting. What type of story fits one versus the other? Or were there movies that plugged into both?
There's definitely movies that plugged into both. In fact, the 8-sequence method is, you could graft 8-sequence onto Professor Edson's structured paradigm. The difference is 8-sequence can allow you to sort of go off and follow other characters in certain moments, but then you come back to the main story after a certain amount of time. And that made more sense to me because the stories I want to tell are a little bit more character-based. They're a little bit looser. They're not really the tightly structured narrative blockbuster kind of stories. That's not the kind of thing that I want to do. And those are primarily the films that Professor Edson analyzes when he talks about his method. So to see 8-sequence and to see that you can sort of take little sidetracks every now and then and go on tangents before coming back to the main story, that made more sense to me. So, but since I know both of them, I can kind of see, okay, this independent film goes on different tangents and goes in different places, but it's still effective because it follows a lot of the things that are also common in Professor Edson's structure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of, like, would maybe Crash and Goodfellas, something that has sort of more of an ensemble cast, fit into that 8-sequence?
Yes, okay. Absolutely. Ensemble pieces are certainly 8-sequence good ones. Road trips can sometimes fit well, and they fit well into both, but I think they work well in 8-sequence. A horror film, I don't know if you ever saw Misery. That's a great example of an 8-sequence film because when the sheriff goes looking for the writer, for about 10-15 minutes, you're following that character. You're not following the lead of the movie. And then at the end of that sequence, we come back to the main story. So that's an example of that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Then what films would fit more into Professor Edson's style?
You think of any popular film, that's come out. Legally Blonde would be a great example of a very traditionally structured film that falls into his style. Collateral is another one that does, where you have a character, they have a number of actions that they have to complete over the course of the film, and by completing those actions, they open up more problems for themselves. And that's what sort of drives the story, is them overcoming those problems as the story continues. It's a little hard to talk about in the abstract, but Professor Edson says that every major story hero has 23 major goals that they need to accomplish over the course of the film. And then there are certain moments that sort of shift what it is that they're trying to get. And then over the course of the film, they learn something in the quest of trying to accomplish all of these goals. Again, it's very simplistic, but that is a little bit more exacting and a little bit more, I guess, I don't know what the right word is. specific than 8 sequence, which gives a little bit more room for playing around, I think.
I know he uses Aaron Brockovich as which is a fantastic film. And I went, after interviewing him, I went back and watched it, and I'm like, this really is an amazing, like Susanna Grant did such an amazing job with
she's
it.
Brilliant.
And even though Julia Roberts, even though the Aaron Brockovich character, Julia Roberts, interacts with these different people that have been affected by the situation, it is really mainly about her journey as the single mom, as kind of trying to prove herself, you know, and deal with all these things that are being thrown at her. So even though you could say, well, there's a huge cast that's involved, but it really is her specific journey.
Right, and so her goals would be, you know, to talk with one of the victims of PG&E, right? And then based on that, she learns something, which he calls fresh news. I don't know if you mentioned that. And then that motivates her to the next goal. So if she learns something with this first client, then her next goal is to go to City Hall to look at topographical maps of the city to find out where things are, you know, and then she learns something there, and that gets her to another goal. So that's sort of the step-by-step process that Professor Edson teaches, and it's there. You know, when you watch Aaron Brockovich, it's all there. And through those goals, she learns to have the self-confidence that she never had when she was a kid.
Right, and she based it on her looks. And she still uses that when she goes to the City Hall, which is such a great scene.
Right. And with Ed Masry, too.
Right, that's true. And then she goes back to law office, and then they're all giving her these dirty looks, but she's still trying to prove, you know, with Albert Finney's character that, like, let me keep doing this, keep doing this. And it's just a great character study.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, it's a beautiful film.
What was the application process like, getting accepted into the CSUN Master's Screenwriting program?
Well, it was one of a couple schools that I applied to. I had applied to UCLA, the University of Texas, Cal State Northridge, and Cal State Fullerton. It's a pretty simple process. You have, you know, information that you fill out about yourself. You'll hand in a resume so that people will understand, you know, what your work history is. Some schools will ask you for writing samples. The University of Texas asked for a feature, which I sent them, which I had. And then CSUN had asked for 2 things. They asked for a 30 to 45 page writing sample, for which I sent them a TV pilot that I had written. And then they also asked for a specific 5-page scene that has to follow certain parameters that they give you. In this case, I think it was 2 people come home and they find from the airport, and they find that there's a piece of luggage that they had that's actually someone else's. And where does the scene go from there?
Oh, wow.
So that was kind of neat. I played around with that a little bit, and I came up with this idea that the piece of luggage that they had actually contained the cremated remains of someone they didn't know. And it turned into an argument between a husband and wife because one's mother had passed recently, and they had an argument about what they were going to do with her remains. So it all kind of tied into that. Wow. So that was fun. So I ultimately got accepted to Northridge, and I also got accepted to Fullerton, which was cool. And I got a chance to talk with the head of the program at Fullerton, who's a wonderful gentleman. His name is Bob. He used to write for Twin Peaks.
Oh, wow.
Back in the day.
Nice.
But ultimately, I decided to go to Northridge because they offered me a job in the film program as well.
And it's a beautiful campus as well. I'm sure Fullerton is too, but I haven't seen it.
Oh, Fullerton's beautiful. CSUN's beautiful. CSUN also has a 300,000 square foot gym.
Oh, nice.
Which I took advantage of every day my first year before I really got into working. So yeah, it was nice. It was definitely the right decision. It was the right campus for me to be on, the right time for me to be there. So I'm really happy with the decision that I made.
I know we were talking about the competitiveness of California and just how difficult it is to find a job or an apartment, whatever.
Yeah.
It wasn't guaranteed as well that you would be accepted into these programs?
Not at all. Not at all. And some of these schools have a very high number of applicants. I know UCLA, they get, I think it's thousands of applicants for, I think it's 12 spots in the graduate program each year. So for writing, it's an extremely competitive program. And then what UCLA does that's interesting is they have the extension program.
Great program.
So if you don't get into the main program, you can go into there and then still, work with their professors and still create work through the school, which is great. And that was something I had thought about as well before deciding to go back full time. The reason CSUN and Cal State Fullerton were high on my list was because they had wonderful faculty and they're the most affordable Masters of Fine Arts screenwriting degree in the country.
In the country.
If you're an in-state California resident, it's the most affordable program in the U.S.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would not think that a place in Los Angeles would qualify for that. That's interesting.
That's the beauty of California and the amount of money that they put into education, the amount of subsidization the government has. It allows somebody to go, through the program. And for me, I went 2 years for a graduate program, and it cost me, I think, just under $15,000.
Really?
It was fantastic. Goodness. It was really wonderful.
Wow.
So, and as
as
someone who had a lot of student loans before, that's something that really mattered a lot to me. Was I wanted to get through this with no debt, and that was something I was able to do.
And Northridge is great because there's so many things. I mean, it's not really a small town in the sense that there's a lot. You're close to so much. It's not like you're remote.
Yeah, it's great. And the fact that I lived in Northridge when I was a student there as well, I never had to use the freeway. And that was just such a godsend. So that was great.
We'd love to hear about your first day, or actually week, in the screenwriting program. What were things that were taught, or were they all introduction into what you'd be learning?
It was a little bit of both. We had the first semester, we had 3 classes. We had an introduction to screenplay analysis, and that was with Professor Edson. And that was the beginning of his sort of explanation of screenplay structure. We didn't actually write in that class, but that first class was sort of like a top level introduction to the terms that he would be using, kind of a general overview of what the structure paradigm is, and then sort of an assignment where we had to watch a film and then break down the first act of that film of what happens in every single scene. And so that sort of built onto more things that we would learn later, where we would do breakdowns of entire scripts, of entire films. But that first class was just sort of an introduction of terms and a basic overview of what the structure was. We had a class called the short screenplay. And that was a class where we needed to write a 30 to 45 page script that could be anything. It could be a TV pilot, it could be a beginning of a feature, it could be a web series, pretty much whatever we wanted. But that was taught by another professor, his name is Jared Rappaport, a much more freer sort of experience. I love him so much. He's such a great professor. He's definitely the opposite of Professor Edson in that he's very free-flowing. And he's very, follow your muse and follow your inspiration and stuff like that. And every bit the successful screenwriter that Professor Edson was. But we started that first class with some guided meditation.
Oh, cool.
If that's any guide to what that was.
Like that. Uh-huh.
And it was just sort of us talking about ideas and sort of tapping into the things that make us want to be writers and the stories that we want to tell. So it was much more sort of an individualistic class and figuring out what it is that you want to say. So that's what that was. It was a couple exercises and figuring out what are the conflicts that you're most interested in. What are the types of people that you're most interested in? And then based on that, you sort of figure out and you sort of back into a writing project that will help you explore that. So for some of us, like I ended up writing a spec script for an HBO show called Room 104 that dealt with a dysfunctional family, because that's kind of the thing that I'm really interested in. Other students wrote the beginnings of features, like the first acts of features, that sort of stuff. But there were all different types of projects there. And then the third class was the 1 hour drama class. And that was taught by a woman named Lawrence Walsh Hodson. She was a story editor on CSI Miami, and she worked on a number of other shows as a TV writer. And that was sort of us coming up with the show that we wanted to write a spec for. So any 1 hour show we could write for. And it was us just sort of talking about the different types of 1 hour shows, the different genres, serialized shows versus, kind of case of the week shows. And really just sort of that first class was sort of boiling down what we had wanted to tackle for the semester and just sort of talking about life in the writer's room and stuff like that. So that was fun. I ended up picking Black Mirror as a show that I wanted to write a spec for because there's a structure to it, but every episode is unique and not really connected to the others. So I was kind of cheating. I wanted to write a story as a feature, so I thought if I did it as a Black Mirror spec, that would work. So yeah, those were the first 3 classes that week. That first week wasn't that stressful because as all semesters, you have sort of a beginning and an intro before you really get into the work and the real meat of the semester. But it was a great sort of, first step into, what would be 2 years of studying writing.
And what was that first movie that you watched that you dissected? Do you remember?
The first one we watched, I believe, was Legally Blonde.
Oh, great.
I think was the first one that we did. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yep.
And what were some of the terms that you were introduced to? You said was it screenwriting terms? Yeah.
So for Professor Edson, there were a couple terms specific to his book and specific to his analysis. Anytime a hero has something that they're trying to do or that they're trying to learn about, he calls that a hero goal. So the main character in your story is trying to do something at the very beginning of the movie, right? So in the case of Legally Blonde, Reese Witherspoon's character is getting ready for that date that she's going to have with her boyfriend that she thinks he's going to propose to her at, right? So she's getting ready for it. And then when she actually gets to that dinner, the boyfriend breaks up with her. So that's what she learned was that, okay, her goal is obviously not going to happen because she got news that completely changed it. That news he calls fresh news. So whenever you get fresh news, you now move on to a new goal as a result of what you've learned. So after the breakup, Reese Witherspoon's character decides, okay, I have to find out why he's breaking up with me. So the goal is then to learn why her boyfriend is breaking up with her. And then as they're driving home, she figures that out. And then she decides, okay, the reason she learns that he's going to law school and that she's not the right kind of girl for him. So once she learns that, her next goal is, okay, I'm going to get into law school so I can prove to him that I am the right kind of guy or right kind of girl for him. So based on the fresh news of, okay, and he's breaking up with me because I'm not in law school, her new goal, her third goal is now I'm going to get into law school myself. And then that continues all the way through the film and it evolves. She gets into school. She finds out he's already engaged to someone else. Then she ends up working, to prove to him that she's really the right kind of girl. She gets an internship at a law firm and then gets involved in a case. And, so all of that is to prove that she really has the wherewithal to be a strong person, to be, a smart, effective person and a good lawyer. So that's the journey she goes on as a result of all of these actions that she takes.
How has the Screenwriting Master's Program transformed your screenwriting process? What do you do differently now?
Well, I think a lot more about the structure from the very beginning than the way that I used to do it. Previously, I would start just by if I had an idea for a movie, I would just start writing and just sort of see where it went. And sometimes good things would come from that. There definitely is a benefit to sort of free writing and just, kind of seeing what comes from it. But my experience has taught me that spending time to outline an idea before actually writing it makes the writing much more efficient. I've saved multiple drafts of screenplays because I've gone and I've outlined ahead of time and I figured out the major, turning points of the film and that sort of thing. That's something I really didn't do beforehand because I sort of rebelled against it. I thought that, structure is the enemy. And the thing that I've learned is structure is your friend. It helps point out errors before you get to them. And it helps you stay on track. If you know what the next thing is that you're writing towards, it's a lot better if it's 5 pages away than if it's 50 pages away. So you know that you have a specific thing to write to. Your scenes have more urgency. Your scenes have more conflict as a result of that. So I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned. And the other thing that I sort of picked up along the way is the more personal that you can make your stories and the more raw you can make them, I think the more effective they are for the reader. The story that I wrote about my dad, there were some really dark things that were in there. And it's not a dark film per se, it is a drama. But really laying bare some emotional things that I had dealt with, a long time ago. It really helps with the writing. It makes it more engaging. It makes it more interesting for the reader. The more you try to cover up sort of the raw things that your characters are dealing with, the less interesting it becomes. So I think it's good to kind of lay it all out there. It's kind of a form of free therapy.
I know you'd said in another class from another professor that they talked about deciding what type of protagonist you really want to focus on. Mm-hmm. Did you start to see parallels in who you wanted to write about?
And it's funny. I have, and I see it now in the film that I'm making now, that it really is, even though the characters in this film that we're making now have nothing to do with me and my time in my life because they're all in their 20s, their struggles are exactly what I'm dealing with now. It really is interesting how subliminally you sort of inform your work with the stuff that you're dealing with in your life and the issues that you really care about and that you struggle with. It's really an interesting thing. I thought I was trying to get away from that, but you really can't. It really was there.
So you see that a lot of the movies that you've been drawn toward have a similar protagonist?
I think so, yeah. People that are trying to do good, but that have come from really hardscrabble, really struggling circumstances, either emotionally or socioeconomically. Those are the kinds of characters that I really gravitate to. One of my favorite films ever was a film called Short Term 12. That was Brie Larson's first real leading role before she got into Room that won her the Oscar. And that film is about a woman who works at a home for troubled teens, and she herself was a troubled teen when she was growing up. So she's sort of enmeshed in that world, and she's struggling to get out of it, but it's hard because, you're surrounded by all this trauma. That really resonated with me because sometimes it's hard to break out of that kind of life when you grow up in it. And eventually, her character does. She does move on in a way. So it's that was a film I really loved. So those kinds of characters, that are really struggling with moving on from a world that they know, even though it's negative, that kind of story really connects with me. I think a great story needs at least one great character who wants something so badly that they're willing to risk everything for it. That creates the drama and that creates the interesting situations that create so many great films. And it could be anything, it could be creating an island of dinosaurs, or it could be, someone just wanting to move on from a life of trauma, anything big or small. There needs to be that overwhelming desire to get whatever it is that they want so badly. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, you need forces against that character that are almost as strong as they are. Some people say every bit as strong or stronger. I wonder about that. Like, there needs to be a weakness in these obstacles that the character is able to identify and exploit in order to move on. If you got those two things, I think you're off to a great start. And then I think the third thing is a viewpoint on the world from the filmmaker or the storyteller's perspective that's unique. And that could be anything. It could be an interesting way that people talk. It could be the way of life in a particular part of the world. Something that makes that story something you haven't seen before, but that you feel that you've seen it before. The way I like to describe it is that if it rhymes with the truth, then it's something that's really effective. I heard Greta Gerwig say that when she was talking about writing Lady Bird.
Yeah.
And she said that script wasn't exactly her experience, but that it rhymed with the truth. And I thought that was really cool. So yeah, I think if you got those three things, I think you're in good shape.
I'm thinking about the adaptation of John Krakauer's book with Christopher McCandless, so Into the Wild. I know that's a few years ago that came out, but to me, that's just such an amazing character journey. And although it's a sad movie, but there's so much in that, and there's so many elements to it. It's not just him braving the wild, but also being exposed to the city. Like one of my favorite scenes is him looking into that like LA bar, and you can see the reflection and just see so much in that look on his face, on Emile Hirsch's face. And that's to me such a great, again, it doesn't end well, but it.
Right, but it's a great journey of discovery. Like you remember the time when he's in Slab City in that film, that not only is a journey of discovery for him, but how many people have never heard of that area before? That's the first time they've ever seen it,
Right.
Yep.
Right, and Rubber Tramps, like I didn't know what, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's that's such an interesting world.
Yeah.
How should a writer begin a movie?
A writer should begin a movie with an event that captures your attention. It could be something audacious. It could be with a car exploding. It could be with an interaction between two people that is a major interaction for their relationship. It needs to start with something that upends the world of the character that you're following. And I think from there, everything sort of goes smoothly from there if you start with that.
I'm thinking of an older movie, Sunset Boulevard, and how the movie is essentially bookended by the same thing happening, but you see the consequence, you see the ending in the beginning, and then I find that very interesting because then you're piecing together, well, how did this happen? I mean, the screenwriter seems so nice. Like what happened? Who was it? And
right. Yeah, I mean, so many movies are like that. You start a film with a murder, and then it's like, okay, that's important, but now we get to see how it all came together and why it happened. Yep.
Right. And so, what about the use of too much conflict in the beginning, or is there no such thing?
Honestly, I don't think there is such a thing as too much conflict. I think there can be conflict that takes away from the main storyline. That's something. But I think in general, the more you have characters with opposing worldviews and opposing goals, I think the stronger the film becomes. And that was something I learned after Rising Star. My two lead characters, they had one major difference of opinion, and that sort of drove the film, but there wasn't enough. There needed to be more. And that was something, like when I got into CSUN, I could see it in my own writing. And the stuff that I wrote after that, I really made it a point from the very beginning, there needs to be something, that's talked about or that's seen, between characters where there's problems. Because the problems are where the conflict comes from, and the story is where the conflict, the story is ultimately what comes from that conflict. It's how they deal with it.
We see that too in documentaries, don't we? Where there's kind of like a conflict, or there's the tension of kind of what happened in the very beginning of the film, and then it goes back.
Oh, very common. Yep.
Which part of the screenwriting process is most difficult for you?
I think the revisions are the hardest part for me. I've generally been pretty good at being able to write a first draft of something. Because of my background as a journalist, I'm used to just kind of spitting out thoughts and just kind of getting them out very quickly. So I can write a first draft usually pretty quickly. It's when you finish that draft and you have that moment of, oh my God, this is so great, I just finished this. And then that thought turns into, but you know this needs to get fixed. And going back over and finding the moments that don't work and introducing theme and, you know, strengthening supporting characters and things like that, and making every character integral to the storyline and cutting characters that you don't need. All of those things are tough for me, because now the way that I write, I try to outline as much as I can before I start. So when I have that first draft, I think, well, this is actually really a second or third draft because I did all this outlining work. So this must be much closer to finishing, you know, than it would be. And then I read it and then I realize it's not. And really kind of bearing down and doing that really fine work of, you know, cutting the sentence of dialogue that you don't need. You know, finding a way to get rid of the widow so you have one line of action instead of two. You know, those kinds of things. That takes me a lot of time. So I think that would be the hardest thing for me.
Do you do the whole, like, put it in a drawer for a month, you know, the cliche, put it away for a month, or no?
Sometimes. It depends on the story. Like I have one script, I've been working on it for, gosh, I think 7 years now. And I'll write a draft, I'll put it away, I'll go do something else, I'll come back to it. I think I'm on draft 8 right now. And it's taken a long time, and it's changed quite a bit from what it originally was. And I think it's still going to change because I started writing it so far before I went to school. Now I look at it and I say, okay, now there's some really big things I can change in this that would make it a lot better. So yeah, I mean, sometimes I put it away for a little bit, and sometimes I put it away for a really long time.
It sounds like that script means a lot to you. Or it's just something?
It's something that I know if I do it right could really help me in my career. So for that particular script, I want to make sure that when the world sees it, it's as good as it can possibly be. Because every time I've pitched it, people love the idea. Literally every single time. I have yet to have a negative reaction to this. So my response to that is, okay, I'm going to sit on this and I'm going to make sure that when it does go out into the world, it's ready and there's not a word out of place. So there's still a ways to go before I get to that, but it's getting there.
In your mind, Marty, what's the purpose of story?
I think story exists to remind people that we're not alone. Every time I see a film that really connects with me, I always think that, okay, someone else is dealing with something similar to what I am. Or someone's thought, you know, a way about life the same way that I have. You know, story is a way to build community. And that's something that connects not only to the film that you watch, but also the way that you make it. You know, so much of indie filmmaking now is about community building. But in terms of, you know, the story itself, it's a way for people to realize that they're, in a lot of ways, we're all the same.
Do you think that's why it's a richer experience seeing it in a theater?
I think so. In certain ways, I think you get more out of seeing like a real good drama or a real good comedy with an audience. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. Yeah, I think seeing a film in a theater is a really powerful way to connect with that community. Like, I still remember in 1999, I think, when There's Something About Mary came out. I was living in Florida and I went to go see that in the theater. And to this day, I have never laughed so hard in a movie. And part of it was because everybody else was laughing just as hard. So that was just an amazing experience. When the South Park movie came out, I think it was that same year or the year before. I remember that there were people standing up and cheering, you know, at parts of that film. Like it was just really, it was hilarious, and it was cathartic, you know, for everybody that was in there. Just a chance to really have a good laugh. Yeah, you know, and it carries all the way to this day. I saw a film called The Farewell last week at the Alamo Drafthouse. And that film was just a beautiful story about a Chinese family and how the American member of that family has to go over to China and deal with a family problem there. And it was, even though it was about a Chinese family, it was universal because the drama within the family is something that so many people know. And in that experience, being in that theater, and it was a packed theater, it was great. Like the moments of pathos were strong, the moments of humor were strong. And at the end of the film, you know, people were talking about it. Like I was talking with the folks that we were sitting next to and, you know, have never met them before. And, you know, here we are with this shared experience. You know, it's something, you know, the Netflixes and Amazons of the world are going to be here forever. But there is still something really special about seeing a film in a theater.
There really is. And it's nice when you can just turn to the person next to you afterward and just, or even just seeing the sort of the demeanor of people leaving the theater. You know, because there is, in LA, it is tough with like, there's this whole new cell phone etiquette that a lot of people just don't sort of regard. So there's that part. But once that's all over and everybody kind of puts the phone away, hopefully, then, you know, we get to this part where you can really see, is it affecting people? And it's interesting when you're laughing at a part that other people aren't. Sometimes I wonder, are they just restraining themselves? Or you hear sort of moments of shock. There's been films, and I won't go into them what they are because they're very political, but where you can tell, you can see the outrage just by a gasp from someone.
But you know what? That's another part of the experience. You know, the community aspect doesn't always have to be positive. I saw when Fahrenheit 9/11 came out, I saw that in the theater, and people broke out into yelling matches after the fight was done.
Wow.
And to me, that was wonderful because yes, it's stressful because obviously people with different beliefs are going to be very vocal about them. And thankfully it didn't devolve into an actual physical altercation. But that's the power of movies. That's the power of cinema, is to get people emotionally engaged. And whether you're all on the same side or if you're on different sides, it's the engagement that's the most important thing. And so obviously I'm on one side of that for that particular film. And there were folks that I was supportive of in that yelling match. But, you know, the fact that we were involved, that's why that film was made, was to generate discussion, was to generate, not controversy, but although of course it had it, but, you know, get people talking. And so that film did its job, you know, in that particular screening. So, and I think that's what filmmakers should shoot for, is that level of engagement, you know, in whatever form, whether it's communal or whether it's in the moment divisive. I think either one is totally valid.
Where was this? What state?
This was in Connecticut.
Oh.
Yeah.
And this was after the screening?
Yeah. Yep.
And did just curious, we'll move on, but did security or ushers have to come in?
There were folks watching, but like no one actually threw a punch or anything like that. So it just sort of, it happened, they yelled, and then everyone just kind of went their separate ways. So to me, and I know a lot of people won't say this, but I look at that as a positive, because everybody gets a chance to kind of get their views out, and, you know, it makes people a little uncomfortable for the moment, but do you want that, or do you want people sitting and stewing, you know?
Right, and the one I'm thinking of, which was more recent, I usually like to clap after films, and I'm always amazed when people don't, but no one wanted to clap after this film, so I was like, I think maybe I'll just keep my clapping to myself.
Okay, all right.
I don't want to be outnumbered here, so. Okay. How do you improve or make a story better?
Well, there's a lot of ways that you can make a story better. The most effective way I've found is to make it shorter. The thing I've learned, one of the big things I learned at CSUN was that there can't be any superfluous moment in a screenplay, because the attention of an audience is so short. You need to constantly be showing them what the next step is, what the next question is, what the next mystery is. There's not a lot of time for you to go on tangents that are not directly related to the story of the film. Now, I talked about before being able to go on tangents through the 8 sequence method. In that case, even the tangents are directly related to the main storyline in some way. So like in the case of Misery, when we follow the sheriff as he tries to figure out what's going on with this missing guy, and he ends up going to the house, we're not following the main character, but we're following a character that's going to come in contact with that character. So it's vital that every single scene be directly related to the narrative spine of it. Finding a way to make all your characters unique is something that's always good. One of the common tricks that I actually use, and that's actually very effective, is if you write a scene and if you cover the names of all the characters, if you read the scene, just the dialogue, and you don't immediately know who the characters are based on what they're saying, you need to go back and figure out a way to write it so that it's specific to that character. And that's a very effective way to kind of improve the uniqueness of the characters in your story. Whether it's by changing the cadence of how they talk, whether it's changing the point of view of what they're saying, figuring out why they're saying it. It helps to deepen who those characters are. Those are some ways I think that can help.
Talk about sort of, like cutting the fat to speed it up. But one thing I love, and I feel like we've gotten too fast paced with some of the movies, and maybe that's just because of I'm in a different generation, But it seems like it's a real art form to actually have it be fast enough for television. Let's say like Sharp Objects. It felt like a slower paced thing, but I get it if you broke down just all the different scenes and sequences and shots and stuff. It was probably very quick, but there was a slow feel to it. And The Last Black Man in San Francisco, there was a slower feel to it. But I mean, I'm sure if you boiled it down, it was actually quite fast paced, but I think that's a real art.
Oh, absolutely. And part of that ties into the way that you film the story. You think of like Big Little Lies. That to me didn't feel all that fast paced because you have a lot of scenes, with like Nicole Kidman, for example, in therapy. Those scenes, even though they're vital to the story, they don't lend themselves to snap bang, fast action storytelling. So the type of story that you're telling can help to affect the pacing of it. Even if it is properly structured in the script, the way that you film it can have a big effect on that.
That's true, because I'm thinking of like the different women in there and their emotional wine drinking scene where the beautiful ocean, like a lot of them seem to have these great scenes. I'm like, wow, I wish I could live there. But and then they're having this sort of meltdown and the husband is like, honey, it's okay, and it was very, it felt very slow moving, but I get it. It probably was just a quick moment.
Yeah, and it's all the style of the filmmaker too. One film I think of a lot in terms of that is The Big Lebowski. So that film, if you read the script moves pretty quick. But if you watch the film takes place in a lot of single shots, and the camera moves very slowly as the characters progress through the scene. So that has a way of slowing things down a little bit. So even though the script is very tight, every scene ties in directly to what the main story is, even though like you can see meandering because of who the character is, everything's there. But the way that the Coens shoot, it's almost kind of theatrical, where everything is taking place within a single frame and characters are moving within and out without any cuts. That can give the feeling of a slower pace. So it's a filmmaking thing more than it is a screenwriting thing.
Okay, interesting.
Yep.
How do you decide a story's ending?
I think deciding your ending is one of the first things that you should do when you're thinking of a movie idea, because audiences can forgive slow beginnings, they can forgive muddy middles, but if the film doesn't have a good ending, you walk out of the theater with a bad taste in your mouth. So I think that's something that you really need to think of right from the get-go. And also because that helps you build towards something. If you know what the ending of the film is when you start writing it, you have the major signpost of what you're building towards. And I think that's really important because a lot of films sort of fall apart in the second act because they don't know where they're going. But if you know right from the get-go what the ending of the film is, you know what's up farther ahead. So, and then you can sort of build your sequences around that and then build your scenes around your sequences, knowing that everything is leading towards a very specific endpoint. I think that's really important.
And so by outlining, that's where you would discover it?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's nice. Outlining is good too, because you can see if an ending that you've picked doesn't fit with the rest of your film. Like a writer may decide there's a moment in the second act that I have to build this film around, which is great, if it's something that you're really passionate about, but it may not work with the ending you've chosen. So by outlining, you can decide, okay, what are the moments that I'm going to be building this film around, and how can I get those moments to help me towards a satisfying ending, if that makes sense.
Have you heard of the 24 plot points? Doing it that way? We spoke to another gentleman who's a writer and an instructor or a professor, and he talked about the 24 plot points.
I may know them under a different name.
Oh, okay, maybe that's it.
Yeah.
So you're writing down these 24 points and then plugging in the different things. So
that might be actually very similar to Professor Edson's process, because he has 23 hero goal sequences in a film.
Okay.
So that could be pretty close to that.
Interesting. And so that's done, in the beginning. So you're mapping that out. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's
sort of your guide, your map.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And so then that 23rd or 24th, that's your ending. That's your...
Yeah, I mean, normally the last 3 to 5 hero goal sequences are your ending. So it's not one particular moment, but it's your third act, right? Wow. So you understand what's going to happen in your third act as far as what the major action through line is, and then also what the emotional sort of wrap up is for these characters. Does this character get what they want? Do they get what they're fighting for? Have they learned anything through the experience? And you don't have to necessarily. I mean, that's how Seinfeld was on the air for 10 years. That however you want to wrap up the story, that act is where all those events take place, and that's where all those questions are answered. So that's kind of the zone, where you can answer those questions.
So let's say 19 through 23 or 25,
yeah.
24.
Yeah, it's according to Professor Edson, the first act has 6 hero goal sequences, the second act has 12, and then the third act can have anywhere from 3 to 5. So yeah, that's usually how it goes.
So when you begin outlining, do you go straight to those last 5, or no, you're just going in order?
Not always. Like for the script that I've been working on for 7 years, I knew what the ending of that film was right off the bat. I knew exactly what it was. And the struggle since then has been, how do I build the film to that? So other films, I have an opening image that I think is really cool, and then I start with that, but then I have no idea where I'm going. So it kind of depends on the story. You have different inspirations, and you have different ideas of elements that you begin with, and then it's just the time that you put in to structure everything else around those to create that film that's got the emotionally satisfying arc to it.
How do you know the ending's good or it's satisfying for someone?
Well, one good way is to test it with people, pitch it to them. I've done that a lot. School taught me that workshopping things is a great way to get out of your own head and get other opinions from folks who are also writers and who are also storytellers. And pretty quickly, if you pitch a few people and you get sort of sideways looks, pretty quick that there's something wrong with what you have. If it works immediately. And that's true with a log line. It's true with any particular moment in a script. If somebody knows a particular story and you're telling them a part of the film, immediately if it connects. So I think that's one good thing. If there's any kind of hesitation, I think that's a point where you need to go back and review, what got you to this point? Why do you think this isn't working? Is there something you can change before that point to make that event more poignant, or scarier or funnier, whatever it is. But in my experience, it's pretty quick that you learn by workshopping whether or not something is working.
Do you ever change endings mid-course? Like you know your ending when you outline, and then as you start writing, you've decided, I think the ending's changed.
Yeah, I've done that. I've written films where the beginning ends up completely changing. I've written films where the lead character becomes another character. it's a process, and it's really trying to figure out who these characters are and trying to figure out, why is this character in this story? That's a question that I think you need to answer when you're putting something together. If you have a story about, like a revenge story, about a guy who's trying to get revenge on someone, I'm thinking of the film Taken. You think of what kind of character would fit best into a story like this. What kind of character has the most to learn by going through the experience of this movie, right? So, for an example, I have a script that I'm writing about a woman whose mother is running for governor in a Midwestern state. And her mother and daughter have a very, very stressed relationship. Mother's very ambitious. She's had a political career. She wants national office, things like that. And the daughter is a very meek person, just wants to live kind of a quiet life, kind of be, off to herself. To be involved in a big media campaign for a big political office is a situation that she would feel really uncomfortable in. So that's why I want that character as my lead, because she will have the most to learn by going through that process. So it's finding, it's finding a character to match what your story is. And that can take any kind of flavor, and it can go in a lot of different directions.
Reminds me of Ingmar Bergman's, forgive me for the name is escaping me, but about the mother and daughter. And the mother is this classical pianist or whatever, and she's had this tour, and she kind of abandoned motherhood. And then her daughter is this more meek, I think she might be like a social worker or something. And she comes back after having been on the road. And even though sometimes if you don't have the subtitles that are playing, just the tension is fantastic to watch.
Yeah, and for me, families are a great place to find that. That's why I enjoy stories about dysfunctional families, because these are people that you're around in the formative years of your life. So any emotional deficits that you have or any issues that you have are primarily because of the folks that you spend time with, whether it's your family or your friends, kind of growing up. Those are where you get those formative experiences. So yeah, that's why I enjoy stories like that.
What are your 5 favorite screenwriting books?
5 favorite screenwriting books, oh boy. Well, I have to plug The Story Solution by Eric Edson.
Sure.
I've read that book backwards and forwards over the last 2 years, and it's fantastic. I like reading Screenplay by Sid Field just because it reinforces the basics. I think that's something that's really important. I really like Story by Robert McKee, because that's kind of more of an esoteric, it gets into, kind of subgenres and just really, really minute things in storytelling in terms of classifying things, which I think is cool. We don't do that much of that. I think that's really good. There's one that it's not a book, it's actually like a transcription of a speech. A guy named Frank Daniel.
Oh yeah.
He's a screenwriting instructor, and he's the one who created the 8-sequence approach. He has, it's like a 70-page transcription of a class that he taught. And that's where he gets into kind of the beginnings of the 8 sequences and things that happen within them and stuff. That was something I was given in class, and I think I probably read it 9 times. It's fantastic. You can probably find it online. And then the 5th one, I would say Save the Cat. I know a lot of folks have differing opinions on that book, but I think that's kind of a neat, fun way to figure out the basics of what your story is by going through that process. I think you need to get a little more granular than Save the Cat when you ultimately sit down to write. I've written a few screenplays with Save the Cat before I got to school. But I think it's really kind of a fun way to get motivated to write something. So I think there's definitely value in that.
If you tried to plug that into Legally Blonde, I'm trying to think back, forgive me, it's been a few years since I've seen it. So does Elle have a Save the Cat moment? She has a few maybe, to kind of prove herself and
let me think.
Make herself likable.
Yeah, I mean, when she's nice to the woman at the hair salon, that's definitely one. I'm trying to think at the very beginning. There's definitely, I can't remember a Save the Cat moment specifically, but I know that all the girls in the sorority absolutely love her. So there were certainly Save the Cat moments beforehand. You can see the love that the girls of the sorority have for Elle. So that's definitely something. I know it's been a little while since I watched it too.
Right. Did they love her from the beginning, though? I don't know if they loved her from the beginning, but then she proves.
No, the girls in her sorority love her.
They do,
She's,
okay.
Yeah, she's the president of the sorority, and she has a 4.0. If you remember at the very beginning, one of the sorority girls has that card that she delivers to her when she's riding the bike through campus, through the opening credit sequence. So yeah, she's definitely adored there. It's when she gets to Harvard that it's a problem.
Ah, okay, right.
The girls don't like her at Harvard, and she has to convince them. But yeah, when she first starts out, everybody's in love with her. Like, she's like the talk of campus. So.
Sure.
Yep.
You talked about Room 104 earlier. I think you wrote like a spec script or you did something.
Yep.
And now you're actually working with the Duplass Brothers.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So when I was starting to make films, the Duplass Brothers were idols of mine. I thought The Puffy Chair was one of the greatest micro-budget films ever made. I still think it's one of the best. And I had really wanted to work with them, and I really wanted to try to see a little bit more about how they make stuff. So about this story goes back quite a ways, actually. About 10 years ago, the Duplass Brothers made a film in Maine. It was called Black Rock. And Mark Duplass's wife, Katie, was the director.
Oh, cool.
And Kate Bosworth was in it, and Lake Bell was in it. It was a thriller.
Yes, okay.
Really, really great film. And when they came to Maine, they didn't have any local crew. So the producer of the movie, my friend Adela, she contacted me because I was living in Connecticut at the time, and she said, do you know anybody that would want to come up and work on this film? And I got her about a third of her crew. So as a benefit of that, I got to go up for a couple days, and I'd hang out with them for a weekend as they were shooting. And when I went there, Mark was there. Oh, cool. So I actually got to meet him when we were on set, and absolutely like fanboyed the whole time, like had a hard time speaking to him, but he couldn't have been cooler, couldn't have been nicer. And so we stayed in touch. So fast forward, 8-9 years, when I moved out to Los Angeles, I ran into him at an event for the HBO show Animals that they had. Nice. And I went to go see the first couple episodes of that, and I saw Mark there, and I told him, I'm in LA now, I'm working in Orange County. So that was great. And then a couple months later, he actually cast me in an episode of the first season of Room 104.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. The show ultimately cut my part out of the episode, so it didn't make the air. But when I was there, I got to meet, the director of the episode, obviously, and all the producers. And then that was sort of my first exposure to the folks that were running their company. So fast forward again, now I'm at CSUN. I have to do an internship in order to graduate. So I contacted Mark and I said, hey, is there any way that I can work for you? It'd be great to be a part of the team. And he said, yeah, we actually started a short form production company. It's called Donut. And they make commercials, they make branded content, they make interactive television, they make all sorts of stuff, and they need help. So I started interning with them, and we worked on a number of non-scripted series and a couple of scripted series back in December of last year. I was helping them with like the development of their interactive TV shows, one of which is going to shoot later this year. I was an associate producer on a web series that they made. So really got a chance to work with them a lot. And that culminated right after I graduated in May. They're making a new movie, and they offered me to work with them as a production assistant. Oh, so wow. Here I am, 42 years old, the oldest production assistant in Los Angeles. And I spent a month working with them, helping them make this film. And it was an amazing experience. It was really, really great. I can't give any details about the movie itself, sure. But being able to work with them and seeing the folks that they work with and how calm everything was on set and just how they work with great people, that's the secret to their success, I think, is they just have so many wonderful people in their ecosystem that it's just awesome. So it was a really great experience, and I hope to keep working with them on stuff in the future.
Yeah, they're very personable and they have a great sense of humor too. It's not like it's just when the camera's on. They're able to laugh and just, yeah.
They're salt of the earth guys. They really are.
And it's interesting how a different little, like what would seem like small opportunities that some people could just say, oh, well, I don't know if I really want to do this, is now turned in. It just shows you, if you kind of stay the course, how someone can notice you.
It's so important. And the other thing to remember too is that, tied into that, it's a long game. You can't come into something expecting someone to help you if you don't help them first. And, the fact that I got the opportunity to PA on this movie because I interned for them, because I gave them my time. And obviously it was a benefit to me because I was able to work with some great people, but they were able to do more as a result of me being there than had I not been there. So that there's a sort of turnabout for that, and then they offer me an opportunity on a movie. That's how this works. People help each other. That's how you get ahead. So, my hope is, if they have another movie in the future, maybe they might ask me to do something, in another role, maybe a little bigger role, because I've shown them, I think I did a pretty okay job, as a PA, and, we'll see where it goes.
Do you see that with some of the students? Because things are so fast paced, whether it's breaking news, the 24-hour news cycle is no longer, it's now like the 2-hour news cycle, and then we've moved on to some new horrible tragedy.
Yeah.
Do you think a lot of younger people, they don't realize that things still do take a while? Because it seems like some people, they want this instant thing, and maybe that's just youth. They don't realize that things do take some time.
I think youth is a big part of it. What is it? Mark Twain had that great quote, "I wish I could be 21 again when I knew everything." I think it's an important growth step, for young people to realize that there are dues to pay. Now, how you pay them is an open question. Some folks, they immediately, go out and start making their own films, and if they find success, that's great. But there's a possible caveat that they don't have the full understanding of what it is that they're doing if they get success early, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then there's other folks, they come in and they start at the bottom and they work their way up. And if they find success then, they have a little bit of a different viewpoint because they understand the different people that are involved in something and what it takes to get to a particular position. So in my experience, the students who get into something and start working their way up, they have more of a respect for the entire process and what everyone does. And I tend to find that those folks are a little more knowledgeable about the entire filmmaking process. And I think they're a little more grateful for, should they find success, that they had worked their way towards it. Some film students of mine, they had gotten out of school, and through resources of their family, they get an opportunity to make a film. And they make the film, and if it finds success, that's great. I feel like they miss a little bit not having an opportunity to work some of those jobs and understand what it's like looking from the bottom. And you don't have to do it forever. You learn a lot on one film. Even if it's just one, you get a sense of what everybody's doing and how important every person is. There's a different viewpoint after you do that. It's not so much, I'm hiring you to do this. It's I understand how you play a small part in the whole of making this movie. So I think that's something that kids learn eventually. Our age definitely has something to do with it. The instant news cycle is definitely something that reinforces the instant gratification and the lack of attention span. That's something that doesn't help a mindset like that. But I think most of the time this town is pretty solid in their attitude that you need to start at the bottom if you want to get anywhere. So I think LA sort of browbeats folks, into that kind of path, I think.
What's the easiest year you've had as a filmmaker?
I would say the year after Rising Star was finished was probably the easiest year I had as a filmmaker. I made a short that year that I wrote, directed, and produced. That's actually on Amazon Prime right now.
Oh, what's it called?
Yeah, it's called Protesters.
Okay. Good.
And that was sort of the joyful next step after finishing a feature that literally took everything out of me. When we finished Rising Star, I didn't know if I would ever make another film again. It took 5 years of my life, and it took a lot of money, and it took all my energy. And I wondered if I had enough in me to do it again. So that short film was sort of like the test. Like, would I be able to do this? I wrote the script with one of my actor friends in mind from Rising Star, a guy named Michael Madsen.
Oh, yeah.
And he's great. He just had finished up a national tour of A Bronx Tale, and he was on Broadway with them for a while.
Good for him.
Yeah, so he produced this short with me, and we wrote it together. Meaning he like gave notes on all the drafts that I wrote. And then it was a 3-day shoot, and we did it, and it was a blast because there was no pressure. We made the whole thing for $2,000, and it was fun. We had all actors that worked with us on Rising Star previous, with the exception of one new guy who was amazing. His name was Norm Golden. He's a New York actor. He's great. And that sort of gave me hope that I could keep doing it. At that point, before we made the film, I thought that my future was going to be back in producing and just sticking with that. But once I made that short film, I felt a lot better about it. And I started thinking, okay, what else can I start making? What else can I start working on? And I had gone back to the script that I've been tinkering with for like 7 years, and I did a draft on that. And I acted in a couple films that year that friends of mine were making. And so it was definitely the most optimistic year in my career as a filmmaker, because it was sort of the beginning of my building up to the point where I could make another feature, I think.
What about the toughest year you had as a filmmaker?
Without a doubt, 2011. Because we shot Rising Star in 2010. We shot in October, and we finished right before November 1st. And the first week of January in 2011, my father died. So I went all the way through post-production, also grieving the loss of my dad. And at the time, it was one of those things where I thought I needed to just push it down and just get it over with. And that was probably the reason we were able to finish the film, was because I did that. But it definitely had repercussions for me later on, as far as grieving the death of a parent, because I really didn't deal with it. Ultimately, over the next couple of years, I would. But that was probably the hardest.
You made Rising Star in Connecticut, and I know that the state of Connecticut seemed very supportive. You were interviewed on at least 1 or 2 news out, and you had coverage, and I don't know if the Hartford Courant or...
Oh yeah, they did. Yeah.
So you were really embraced.
Yep.
And then coming to a state where there is a film energy, but there's so many people doing it. How did that feel? Because you came from being a rising star in Connecticut. Sorry, had to do it. And then you come here, and I'm not saying you're not a rising star, but I'm saying it's just there's so many rising stars.
You're one of a million.
Right. Yeah. How was that? Because you have a level head, and you're grounded, salt of the earth, I would say, from knowing you.
Thanks. It was a challenge. I think part of why I did it was because the institutional support that I got from Connecticut in making Rising Star was starting to disappear. We had a tax credit from 2006 to about 2012, and that brought so much filmmaking activity and so much energy to the state. But in 2012, they stopped the program. Oh. And once that happened, all of that filmmaking energy was gone within weeks. It was just done. And I was sort of caught off guard because here I am, I put so much time and energy into this, I didn't really know what I needed to do next once that happened. So I had actually, right around that time, I actually started a business with two colleagues of mine that I taught with at Quinnipiac. And it was a production company and social media services and crowdfunding consulting we did with a lot of folks from Yale, from the Entrepreneurial Institute there. And that lasted for about 2.5 years. And we made a decent living doing that. But ultimately, I wanted to be in an area where that energy was there. And I knew it would never happen in Connecticut again. So it was just a matter of looking and where did I want to go. I tried living in New York for about a year. Actually lived with Michael Madsen.
Oh, nice.
And that was great. And we had a great time.
There's a web series.
Oh, 100%. We talked about that, actually.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then after that, I came back home because my mom was sick, and I was home for about a year. And then at that point, I was living in Connecticut. There was nothing going on film-wise. I was having trouble finding work. So I just decided, okay, I just need to go where the action is. And that's when I started putting out feelers, for jobs in California. And thankfully, about 6 months after that, Chapman contacted me and said, we're interested in having you as our production manager. And wow. I got the offer, and 2 weeks later, I was in California.
This was in 2012?
2015.
2015. Okay,
yeah.
So the economy was more, things had improved.
A little bit.
Right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Because was it challenging to find jobs out here? Especially with your background? You have a great background.
It was different. I applied for primarily educational jobs because I knew I was going to be one of a million people applying for production jobs, and I didn't live in LA. So I knew if I was going to get something, it would be something that was a little more institutionalized. So higher ed seemed like the natural fit because I had taught, and I had applied at different film schools. I applied at UCLA, AFI, or at Cal State Fullerton, I think I applied at actually. And, nothing came of those until, Chapman had reached out to me. And the reason Chapman reached out to me is because one of their deans went to the film school at Florida State.
Oh.
So when he saw that I was a grad, that's how I got that in. So that was ultimately, it was the network, that ultimately helped me to get that job.
Because you had such, not just the education, but a body of work. You'd been through the trenches, and to think that it took that long to find something just shows you how competitive.
Oh, 100%, 100%. And I was so grateful to get that offer because I had assumed nothing would come of it. Just because I don't know anyone out here, and it wasn't until I actually got here that I started creating a network of LA folks. It was just a Florida person that helped me get out there. So it was a very, very unexpected thing.
What movie are you making actually right after this interview?
So once we're finished, I'm going to be driving to Agora Hills, where I will be directing my second feature. It's a film called Stay With Me. It's a drama, and it's a story about a woman who's suffering from mental illness, and it's about her best friend and her boyfriend and how they deal with the lead up to and the aftermath of her suicide. So it's heavy subject matter. It's not a heavy film, although there are some certainly emotional moments in it. I met the writer, the co-writer of the film was an intern of mine when I worked at Cal State Northridge, and he was just dead set on making an independent film once he graduated. And he bugged me for about 6 months, and eventually I joined him on the journey. And he said, we can shoot in my parents' house, I can get equipment for free, we can work with students that are graduating from CSUN's film program. And eventually I came around on it, and we decided to put the team together. And I hired a group of actors that had graduated from Chapman University's acting program. So those are all of our actors. We had, like I said, our crew is all CSUN film graduates and a couple Chapman students that I used to work with. And we're halfway done. It's a 13-day shoot, and we finished day 7 yesterday. So I'm on my way out there to work on day 8 today, and we'll have it done by next Monday. And then we're gonna go into post, and I'm hoping by the middle of next year, we'll have the film done.
So having made Rising Star in Connecticut, and different time, different state, different world probably, what same things are you taking with you or leaving behind, set of skills or, expectations?
There's no expectations on this movie. When we made Rising Star, that was the most important thing I had done in my life up to that point. And I pressured myself accordingly. This time, there's no pressure. One, because we're making the film for next to nothing. Our entire budget's going to be under $10,000.
Oh, wow.
So that's a big part of it. That's a big help. But also, this is not something that I'm looking at as a linchpin in my life to kind of carry me into another state of being, as a filmmaker. I've written and directed a feature already, so I know I can do it. Now it's just a matter of how good can I do it. So it's a very different mindset on this one. And it's a very different process with the actors. I find myself a lot more collaborative on this, as far as actors giving input, on their lines and on their performance. The crew members that I'm working with, I'm a lot more collaborative with them this time. Whereas with Rising Star, I had a very specific plan that I did everything I could to stick to. It's a lot different now. And honestly, I like it a lot more. This kind of collaborative approach, I think, definitely helps. And it starts with Adam Mayman, my co-writer and my producer. He really is the energy behind this film, and I sort of joined for the ride. And that's something I've never done before. Every other film I've made, it's always been my genesis, and I sort of carry everything from nothing and create everything from nothing. But now, Adam's really the driver of this, and I'm sort of along just to kind of help shepherd it through and bring my network with me and bring my connections and my experience. And it's really been a great time.
So Adam came up with the idea?
We met for pizza last August, almost a year ago this week, actually. And he had an idea for a film that takes place in 2 timelines. That's what he wanted to do. And I said, okay, well, what are some of the things that you want to talk about? What are the things that you want to explore? And he said, I'm interested in LGBTQ issues and how 20-somethings are dealing with identity. I want to talk about mental illness. I want to talk about grief. And grief was what stuck with me because my mother passed away 2 years ago. And that was sort of like, okay, well, why don't we think of something that ties around the death of someone close to someone else? And that was sort of the beginning of the evolution of what ultimately the story turned into. So we kept that sort of 2-timeline idea. The film takes place in 2 separate timelines. The first one is the lead up to the young woman taking her life, and the other one is the aftermath of it. But the film cuts back and forth between them, so as to give the impression that grief is a never-ending process and it sort of permeates every part of your life. So that's kind of where we're at. And once we get into post-production, we're gonna play a lot with time and what you see and how things are juxtaposed, present versus past, and stuff like that. And I think it's gonna be a good film.
You and Adam, you met for pizza, and then how soon did one of you begin writing? Taking turns?
We outlined the film together over about 2 weeks, and then we split up scenes to write. I wrote most of the timeline 2 stuff that happens after the young woman takes her life because of my experience dealing with the death of my mom. There were a lot of events that I wanted to put in there that I had gone through and situations I had dealt with. And then Adam handled the first timeline, sort of the lead up to it. And then once we combined everything, we just started tweaking together. I would do a pass, he would do a pass. And we did, I think, 8 drafts before we landed on what we're shooting.
Did you have a table read with the actors, or no time for that?
No, we actually didn't even cast. We had a very interesting process for this. Our other producer, a woman named Sarah DeLeon, she's also a talent manager. And one of her clients had read the script and loved it and really wanted to be in it. So I said to Sarah, well, I'm happy to meet with her. We'll talk about it. So I met with her, very smart young woman. Her name is Laura Fox. Really had really deep insights on the character of Katie, the woman who takes her life, and really connected with her and experiences that she had had. And when I met with her, it wasn't a casting session. It was just sort of almost like an interview. And when we were done, I thought, okay, this was the first moment where I sort of jumped off the regular path, or the path that I took on Rising Star, where I had to control everything. I said, I'm gonna try something different on this. I'm gonna cast her, not even seeing her perform outside of her reel and the films that she had already worked on and stuff like that. I watched those, was impressed with her work. I said, okay, and I offered her the part, and I said, listen, I need your help. Can you find me actors that you've worked with that fit these parts that you have good chemistry with? And she ended up finding us the other 2 leads of the film.
Oh, wow.
And we've been working together, and everything has been flawless. And I was terrified. And any director that you talk to would probably look at me with a hairy eyeball and say, you're out of your mind for doing it that way. But when you're making a film for this little money, you can take chances and you can try different things. So now I have 3 actors that are 100% dedicated to this movie, like incredibly dedicated. They all have an existing relationship, so the chemistry's already there. It's not something I had to create. And now we're off making this film.
How smart.
Well, looking at it now, you could say it was a bit of a risk when we did it.
But it's not just people she knows, it's the chemistry that's where it's really going to show on screen. Mm-hmm. You know, just because it could be someone from acting class, hey, I want to get you, but to know that if she's done scenes with them and they know each other, they've gone for coffee afterwards, whatever, that's going to translate.
They were all friends. So when we did our first actual rehearsal, by an hour into it, they're all hanging out on the couch, they're all lying across each other's laps, they're all laughing and joking and telling stories. They've all worked with each other before. 2 of them were former roommates.
Oh, wow.
So it was one of those kismet moments where, you know, all right, we've got 3 people. You know, it would take 10 years of work with me of casting to try to find 3 people with this kind of chemistry. So it really worked.
What do you love about being on a film set?
That has evolved in my career. When I first started, I loved the idea of being the sort of general of a group of people that are out to tell the story that I have in my head and are helping me create it. But that's changed. As I've gotten older, I appreciate just the act of being on a film set and being part of a team that's creating something. And now, I think the best part of being on a film set is being part of a team of collaborators that's looking for the best possible version of the story I want to tell. That took me a long time to get there. But now that I'm here, it's a joy to be on set every day. It's a joy to work with people that are passionate about a story that, you know, that I help create, but that they have a major hand in, and giving them the freedom to, you know, to give the input, to give the thoughts on moments that aren't ringing true and suggestions for things that might work better. And being in an environment where you know you don't have to be the one with the best idea all the time, and knowing that you don't always have the best idea. When you're in a situation like that where there's people with you and they can help you create the best version of a movie, it's really a beautiful thing, and it's something that I'm really happy to be a part of, and it's something I hope I can continue to be a part of in the future.
How is being on a film set similar to being in a classroom? Or maybe the two aren't similar?
Oh no, they're very similar. Being on a film set is a constant opportunity for education, because there is never a film where every person on the crew is at the same education level for everything. So you always have an opportunity to point out something to someone, to teach someone a technique of something, to offer suggestions to people, and for people to offer suggestions to you and to teach you things. You know, I think of it from a teaching perspective because I'm a teacher, but on this set, I'm learning things that I didn't know, mostly from the actors, like actors' exercises and how they get themselves warmed up for scenes. These are things I've never done. So like I see them and I see them working. This happened yesterday. Our two leads, they were getting ready for a really emotional scene, and they were going through an exercise, which I still don't understand, where they were just talking back and forth to each other the same motion. Like one will say, "I have blue eyes," and then he'll say back, "You have blue eyes." And they'll go back and forth with that, and they'll change based on things that they notice about each other. And they said it was a Meissner technique, and I need to learn more about that. But this is something I'd never seen. So, even for me, the opportunity to learn something on set is very similar to the classroom. And I think, generally, whether it's film or the classroom, if the teachers are in a situation where they can learn things, I think that's the best environment. Because if everybody's open to new ideas, the teacher's leading the class, but they're not always the one that knows everything. So if you know that, I think that's a really great opportunity for the teacher to learn stuff, as well as for the students to understand that having that mentality will help them as well.